I stood by the punch bowl at our company Christmas party, watching my boss hold up my hand like I was a piece of evidence in a trial. "Is that glass, or did the librarian find it in a cereal box?" he shouted, pointing at my wedding ring. The entire office exploded with laughter. My husband Julian stood beside me, quiet as always, offering me that patient smile. He didn't defend himself, which only made them laugh harder. What none of them knew was that the nobody they were mocking would soon be sitting on a federal bench, holding their entire future in his hands. My name is Brooke Miller, and I was a senior designer at Morrison Elite Marketing. For 3 years, I'd worked 80-hour weeks, saved their biggest accounts, and made my boss Silas Morrison look like a genius. And this was how it ended, with public humiliation and a pink slip on December 23rd. The party was supposed to be a celebration. December 22nd, the last workday before Christmas, and Morrison Elite Marketing had rented out the top floor of the Plaza Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, open bar, a jazz band playing in the corner. Everyone was dressed in their finest, designer suits, cocktail dresses that cost more than my monthly rent, jewelry that sparkled under the lights. I wore a simple black dress I'd bought on sale. It was elegant, I thought, classic. But the moment I walked in with Julian, I felt the stares. My coworkers weren't looking at my dress. They were looking at my husband in his khaki pants and sweater vest, his wire-rimmed glasses, his gentle smile. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who spent his days surrounded by books. Silas spotted us immediately. He was holding court near the bar, his third scotch already in hand, his voice carrying across the room. "Brooke," he called out, loud enough that conversation stopped. "Come here, I want to show everyone something." I should have known better. I should have turned around and left right then. But I walked over, Julian's hand warm in mine, thinking maybe Silas was going to thank me for saving the Richardson account last month. I'd worked until 2 a.m. for 3 straight weeks to make that presentation perfect. Instead, he grabbed my left hand and held it up like a trophy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I present to you the saddest engagement ring in marketing history." The laughter started immediately. Sharp, cruel laughter that cut through the jazz music and the champagne bubbles. Silas turned my hand back and forth under the light, making my modest diamond catch the glow. "Seriously, Brooke, what is this? A quarter carat?" He squinted at it theatrically. "Or is it cubic zirconia? Come on, be honest. Did your librarian husband get this from a vending machine?" My face burned. I tried to pull my hand back, but Silas held on tighter. "I'm just saying, if you're going to represent a luxury brand firm, you need to look the part. This ring screams clearance rack at a strip mall jewelry store." Julian squeezed my other hand gently. When I looked at him, he was still smiling that same patient smile, like he was watching a child throw a tantrum. It infuriated me that he wouldn't defend himself. But that was Julian, always calm, always quiet, always refusing to engage with bullies. "It's a beautiful ring," I said, my voice shaking. "Julian picked it out himself, and I love it." "Of course you do, honey," Silas said in a mock-sympathetic voice. "Because you don't know any better. That's what happens when you marry a guy who works at a library. What does he make? 30,000 a year, 40 if he's lucky." More laughter. I saw my coworker Amanda covering her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Marcus from accounting was actually wiping tears from his eyes. Even Christina, who I'd considered a friend, was smiling behind her wine glass. Silas wasn't done. He released my hand and turned to Julian, looking him up and down with exaggerated pity. "No offense, buddy, but Brooke here is a star. She's smart, talented, gorgeous, and you're... what exactly? A book nerd who checks out romance novels to old ladies." Julian just nodded politely. "I work with legal texts, actually. But yes, I do help people find the books they need." "Legal texts," Silas slapped his knee. "Oh, that's precious. What you're studying to be a lawyer at your age." He looked around the room. "How old are you, man? 40. 38, Julian said quietly. 38 and still working at a library. Silas shook his head sadly. "Brooke, sweetheart, I say this because I care about you. You could have done so much better. You're settling. You married the safest, most boring option available because you were afraid to aim higher. I felt tears stinging my eyes. These people had been my colleagues for 3 years. I'd celebrated birthdays with them, covered their shifts, helped them with their presentations. And now they were standing in a circle around me, watching my humiliation like it was entertainment. "Julian is kind and smart and loyal," I said, my voice cracking. "He's worth 100 of." "Of what? Successful people," Silas interrupted. "Brooke, that's exactly the attitude I want to talk to you about." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. My stomach dropped. "I was going to wait until after the holidays," Silas said, his voice taking on a serious tone that somehow made everything worse. "But since we're all here together, and since you've made such a point of defending your choices, I think now is the perfect time." He handed me the envelope. I knew what it was before I opened it. My hands shook as I pulled out the single sheet of paper. "Notice of termination, effective December 23rd. I read out loud, my voice barely a whisper. "That's right," Silas said. "I'm letting you go, Brooke, and before you get all weepy and dramatic, let me explain why. This firm is built on prestige. Our clients are millionaires, billionaires, people who expect to work with the best. When they look at our team, they need to see success. They need to see ambition. They need to see people who are winners." He gestured at me with his Scotch glass. "You're a great designer, nobody's denying that, but your whole vibe lately has been so middle class, so safe, so boring. You married a librarian, for God's sake. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You bring your lunch in Tupperware. That's not the image we need going into the new year." I stared at the termination letter. After everything I'd done for this company, after every late night, every weekend, every sacrificed holiday. "You're firing me because of who I married." "I'm firing you because you don't have the high-status energy we need," Silas corrected. "Nothing personal, but we're bringing in Veronica Chen from the New York office, and she drives a Tesla and just got engaged to a venture capitalist. That's the vibe we need." The room was completely silent now. Even the jazz band had stopped playing. Everyone was staring at me, waiting to see what I would do. Would I cry? Would I beg? Would I make a scene? Julian's hand found mine again. "Let's go home, Brooke," he said softly. "Yes, please do," Silas said. "And Brooke, I need you to clean out your desk tomorrow. I can't have you here on the 23rd spreading negative energy. Come in early, pack your things, and leave your key card with security." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him about all the times I'd saved his incompetent ideas, all the clients I'd rescued from his terrible pitches, all the work I'd done while he took credit. But my throat was closed up, and tears were streaming down my face, and all I could do was nod. We walked toward the exit. Behind us, the party was already resuming. The jazz band started playing again. Someone laughed at a joke. By the time we reached the elevator, it was like we'd never been there at all. The ride down to the parking garage was silent. Julian held me while I cried, his hand rubbing small circles on my back. He didn't say, "I told you so," even though he'd warned me about Silas months ago. He didn't say anything at all until we were in our old Honda, the engine struggling to turn over in the cold. "The loudest person in the room is often the most afraid, Brooke," he said quietly. "Let's go home and have some cocoa." We drove home through the snowy streets in silence. I couldn't stop crying. Every time I thought I was done, I'd remember another detail: Amanda's laugh, Marcus's tears of amusement, the way Christina had smiled, and a fresh wave would hit me. Our apartment was small and warm. Julian had put up a modest Christmas tree in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments and lights he'd found at a thrift store. It was nothing like the elaborate displays my coworkers posted on social media, but it was ours. He made hot chocolate while I changed out of my dress and into sweatpants. When I came back to the living room, he was sitting on the couch with 2 mugs. Whipped cream melting on top. His phone was buzzing on the coffee table, but he ignored it. "I'm sorry," I said, curling up next to him. "I'm sorry they treated you like that. You didn't deserve it." "Neither did you," he said, "and you have nothing to apologize for." I wasted 3 years at that firm. 3 years of my life, and Silas just threw me away like I was nothing. Julian set down his mug and pulled me closer. You're not nothing, Brooke. You're talented and creative and strong. Silas is a bully who's intimidated by people who are better than him. He'll get what's coming to him. How? I laughed bitterly. He's rich and successful and connected. People like him never face consequences. Julian's phone buzzed again. This time he picked it up, glanced at the screen, and excused himself to the bedroom. I heard his voice through the door, low and serious, but couldn't make out the words. The truth was, I didn't really know what Julian did all day. I knew he worked at the Central Legal Library downtown. I knew he had a master's degree in something related to law. But he was so private about his work, so humble, that I'd never pushed for details. He'd told me he was helping organize legal research materials and assisting with case file management. It sounded boring and bureaucratic, exactly the kind of quiet, steady work that suited his personality. I loved that about him, that he didn't need to brag or show off, that he found fulfillment in simple things. But I'd be lying if I said Silas's words hadn't stung. My husband was approaching 40 and working at a library. We lived in a small apartment. We drove an old car. We couldn't afford fancy vacations or designer clothes or the lifestyle my coworkers took for granted. Was I settling? Had I chosen safety over ambition? Julian came back into the living room looking thoughtful. Everything okay? I asked. Yes, he said. Just some work stuff, nothing urgent. Julian, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever feel like you should have done more with your life, like you should have aimed higher? He sat down beside me, his expression serious. Brooke, I wake up every morning next to the woman I love. I spend my days doing work that matters, even if other people don't understand its value. I come home to you every night. What more could I possibly want? But don't you want success, recognition? Don't you want people to respect you? I want to respect myself, he said. And I do. The rest is just noise. Christmas Eve arrived cold and gray. I spent the morning packing up my desk at Morrison Elite Marketing while the office was empty. 3 years of work fit into 2 cardboard boxes, awards I'd won, projects I'd led, photos of team events where I'd actually believed these people were my friends. The security guard who took my key card looked sympathetic. Sorry to see you go, Ms. Miller. You were always nice to us. That small kindness made me cry again in the parking garage. Christmas Day was quiet. Julian had bought me a beautiful thick wool coat, navy blue with silver buttons. For the new opportunities coming your way, he said, you'll want to look professional. I didn't tell him I'd been sending out resumes for weeks with no responses. The marketing world was small, and Silas had powerful friends. I was terrified I'd been blacklisted. We spent the day watching movies and eating too much pie. Julian seemed unusually cheerful, almost excited about something, though he wouldn't say what. Just thinking about the new year, he said when I asked. Fresh starts, new beginnings. On December 27th, I woke up to a notification on my phone. Silas had posted a photo of himself on Instagram wearing a new gold Rolex. The caption read, Setting goals for record profits in the new year. Excited to lead Morrison Elite Marketing to new heights. Here's to cutting dead weight and rising higher. Boss life, new year, new success. I showed Julian. He studied the photo for a long moment, then handed the phone back. Justice is like a slow-growing tree, Brooke, he said, but its fruit is very sweet. On December 28th, something strange happened. I still had access to the shared company drive. It hadn't cut off my credentials yet. Out of curiosity, maybe a little bit of spite, I logged in to download some of my old project files for my portfolio. That's when I stumbled into a folder I'd never seen before. It was labeled SLM Private Financial, and it shouldn't have been on the shared drive at all. But there it was, and when I clicked on it, my blood ran cold. Tax documents showing Morrison Elite Marketing hadn't paid federal taxes in 3 years. Transfer records moving money from the company's employee pension fund into Silas's personal accounts. Invoices for private jets and luxury cars, all charged to the company as business expenses. Email chains with Silas's accountant discussing how to hide assets from creditors. The firm wasn't just successful. It was a house of cards built on fraud. I sat staring at my laptop screen for over an hour. Should I report this? Should I just delete everything and pretend I'd never seen it? What if Silas found out I'd accessed the files? Then I thought about the way he'd humiliated me at the Christmas party. The way he'd fired me for marrying a good man. The way he'd stolen from his own employees while bragging about his success. I downloaded everything to a flash drive and logged out. That night I showed Julian. He read through the documents carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is serious fraud," he said finally. "Federal crimes. The IRS needs to see this. The Department of Labor, too." "Will they even care? Silas has friends everywhere." Julian looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something hard and cold beneath his usual gentleness. "They'll care," he said. "Trust me." On December 30th, Julian sat me down at our kitchen table. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. He was always so calm, so steady. But now his hands were fidgeting with his coffee mug. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I've been keeping a secret from you, not because I don't trust you, but because I wanted to surprise you at the right time." My heart started racing. What kind of secret? "I haven't been just working at the library, Brooke. I mean, I have been working there, but not in the capacity you think." He pulled out his phone and showed me an official-looking email. It was from the United States federal court system, dated 6 months ago. "Dear Mr. Miller, we are pleased to inform you that your nomination to serve as a United States Bankruptcy Court judge for the Central District has been confirmed." I read the email 3 times. "You're a judge, a federal judge." I was sworn in officially on January 1st, but yes. The nomination process took almost a year. Background checks, interviews, vetting. I couldn't tell anyone until everything was finalized. I wanted to surprise you on New Year's Day, but with everything that's happened with Silas, I think you should know now. I stared at my husband like he was a stranger. "You're a federal judge." "Bankruptcy court, specifically. I'll be handling cases involving corporate fraud, debt restructuring, asset seizures. That's why I've been at the library, studying case law, preparing for the bench." "Julian, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I know how you feel about bragging and showing off. I didn't want you to think I was trying to prove something to people like Silas. I took this position because it's the right thing to do, because I can help people, not because I need validation." He pulled out another document. 3 days ago, 3 major creditors filed for involuntary bankruptcy against Morrison Elite Marketing. They're claiming Silas owes them over $15 million and has been hiding assets. The case was fast-tracked as an emergency corporate matter. My hands started shaking. "And you're going too?" "I'm the presiding judge," Julian said quietly. "The hearing is scheduled for January 2nd at 10 a.m. Silas doesn't know yet who's been assigned to the case. The court only notifies attorneys of record, and they won't tell him until he walks into the courtroom." I felt like I was in a dream. My quiet librarian husband was a federal judge, and he was about to preside over my former boss's bankruptcy case. Is that legal? I mean, won't there be a conflict of interest?" I disclosed everything to the chief judge. Your employment, your termination, the harassment at the Christmas party. He reviewed the facts and determined that none of it creates a legal conflict. Silas's case is about corporate fraud and creditor claims. Your personal history with him is irrelevant to the legal matters at hand. Julian took my hands. "I can recuse myself if you want me to. If you think this is wrong, if you think it's revenge. I'll step away and let another judge handle it." I thought about Silas's smirking face, his cruel laughter, the way he'd held up my hand like it was evidence of my failure, the way he'd mocked Julian, called him a nobody, implied he was worthless. "No," I said, "don't recuse yourself, let the law handle it." New Year's Eve was surreal. While we sat quietly in our apartment watching the ball drop on TV, Silas threw a massive party at his penthouse. I knew because he posted about it constantly on social media. photos of champagne fountains and ice sculptures, videos of celebrities and models dancing on his terrace, a live stream of fireworks over the city skyline. And at 11:59 p.m., he sent me a text. "Watching the fireworks from my penthouse. Hope you're enjoying the view from the street. Happy New Year, loser." I showed Julian. He was sitting at our kitchen table, carefully pressing his black judicial robes. He barely glanced at the text. "He has no idea what's coming, does he?" I said. "No," Julian replied. "He spent his whole life believing that wealth and connections make him untouchable. Tomorrow, he's going to learn that the law doesn't care about his Rolex or his penthouse or his Instagram followers." I watched my husband work, his movements precise and careful. This was a man who'd spent months studying case law, preparing arguments, learning every detail of bankruptcy code. He'd done all of this in silence, without praise or recognition, because it was the right thing to do. Silas had called him a nobody, a loser, a man with no ambition. But tomorrow, Silas would stand before him and learn what real power looked like. January 2nd arrived cold and bright. I woke up at 6 a.m., too nervous to sleep. Julian was already in the kitchen, drinking coffee and reviewing his notes. He was wearing his judicial robes, and he looked different, taller, somehow more commanding. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "No," he said. "I'm ready." We drove separately to the federal courthouse. Julian had to arrive early for procedural meetings. I parked in the public lot and walked up the marble steps, my new wool coat keeping me warm against the winter wind. The courthouse was impressive, all stone columns and American flags, security checkpoints and metal detectors. I'd never been inside a federal building before. It felt important, weighty, like the kind of place where real justice happened. I made my way to Courtroom 4B and took a seat in the back row of the gallery. The room was beautiful, dark wood paneling, high ceilings, the seal of the federal court system mounted on the wall behind the judge's bench. Other people started filtering in, lawyers with expensive briefcases, court reporters setting up their equipment, a few other observers who looked like they might be creditors or journalists. And then at 9:45 a.m., Silas Morrison walked in. He was wearing a custom three-piece suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled. His new Rolex caught the light. He had 2 lawyers with him, both carrying stacks of documents, both looking stressed. Silas, on the other hand, looked completely relaxed, confident, almost amused. He spotted me in the gallery, and his face lit up with cruel delight. He nudged his lawyer and whispered something, pointing at me. Then he turned and gave me an exaggerated wave, the kind you'd give to a child. "Look, the loser showed up to watch me win," he said loudly enough for half the courtroom to hear. His lawyers tried to shush him, but he just laughed. "What? It's a public hearing. She's allowed to be here, though I have to wonder why she'd want to watch me destroy these ridiculous claims. Doesn't she have job interviews to go to?" More laughter from Silas. His lawyers looked increasingly uncomfortable. The bailiff entered through a side door. "All rise," he announced. "The United States Bankruptcy Court for the Central District is now in session, the Honorable Julian Miller presiding." Everyone stood. Silas was still chuckling, still checking his watch. He wasn't even looking at the bench. And then Julian walked in. I wish I could describe the look on Silas's face when he finally glanced up and saw my husband in black judicial robes, walking toward the bench with absolute authority. His expression went from smug confidence to confusion to absolute horror in about 3 seconds. His mouth fell open. His Rolex-laden hand froze halfway to his pocket. One of his lawyers gasped audibly. Julian sat down, arranged his papers, and looked out at the courtroom with complete professional composure. If he noticed Silas's reaction, he didn't show it. "Please be seated," Julian said, his voice clear and commanding. "This is case number 25BK00147 in Ray Morrison Elite Marketing, LLC. Appearance of counsel, please." Silas's lead attorney stood up shakily. "David Chen appearing for the debtor, Your Honor. If I may, We weren't informed of the presiding official's identity until this morning, and I believe we may need to file a motion for. For what, counselor? Julian's voice was sharp. Are you suggesting there's a conflict of interest? Your Honor, my client has a personal relationship with your wife, and we believe. Your client fired my wife 2 weeks ago after publicly humiliating her at a company party, Julian said. I disclosed this to the chief judge, who reviewed the matter and found no legal conflict. Your client's bankruptcy petition involves fraud allegations and creditor claims. Mrs. Miller's former employment is not relevant to these proceedings. But, Your Honor, are you filing a formal recusal motion, Mr. Chen? The lawyer looked at Silas, who was still frozen in shock. No, Your Honor. Then let's proceed. For the next hour, I watched my husband methodically dismantle Silas's entire defense. The creditor's attorneys presented evidence of unpaid debts, bounced checks, and fraudulent financial statements. Silas had borrowed millions of dollars from investors and vendors, promising returns that never materialized. Julian questioned every discrepancy with surgical precision. Mr. Morrison, these documents show that you transferred $800,000 from the company account to a personal account 3 days ago. Can you explain the business purpose of that transfer? Silas tried to bluster. Your Honor, surely there's been some mistake. I'm a pillar of this community. I employ dozens of people. I've won awards. That's not an answer to my question, Julian said coldly. Why did you transfer $800,000 in company funds to your personal account 3 days before this bankruptcy filing? It was a performance bonus. I earned that money. A performance bonus? From a company that hasn't turned a profit in 18 months and hasn't paid federal taxes in 3 years. Silas's lawyers tried to object, but Julian cut them off. He pulled out a stack of documents, the same files I downloaded from the shared drive and given to the IRS. I have evidence here of systematic fraud, Julian said. Unpaid taxes, misappropriated pension funds, assets hidden in offshore accounts. Mr. Morrison, did you really think you could steal from your employees and creditors without consequences? Silas tried to interrupt several times, his voice getting louder and more desperate. Your Honor, this is unfair. You're biased. Your wife is just bitter because I fired her, and now you're using your position to. Bailiff, Julian said calmly, please remind Mr. Morrison that outbursts will not be tolerated in this courtroom. The bailiff stepped forward. Silas went pale and sat down. Julian continued. Let's talk about status, Mr. Morrison. You told my wife that status is everything. You fired her because her middle-class lifestyle didn't fit your brand. You mocked her for marrying a librarian, for driving an old car, for not projecting enough wealth. He leaned forward, his voice like ice. In this courtroom, Mr. Morrison, my status is the law, and the law says you are a thief. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Silas's lawyers seemed to have stopped breathing. Julian picked up his gavel. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting the creditor's petition for involuntary bankruptcy. Morrison Elite Marketing, LLC, is hereby declared bankrupt, effective immediately. Silas shot to his feet. You can't do this. I'll appeal. Furthermore, Julian continued, ignoring him, I'm issuing an immediate order for the seizure of all personal assets purchased with company funds within the past 6 months. This includes 1 Rolex watch, 1 Mercedes S-Class vehicle, 1 yacht deposit, and 1 Miami penthouse down payment. That's my money, Silas screamed. I earned that money. You stole that money, Julian corrected. From your employees' pension fund, from your creditors, from the United States Treasury, and now you're going to pay it back. He signed a document with swift, decisive strokes. I'm also appointing a court receiver to oversee the liquidation of all company assets. The receiver will ensure that employees are compensated for stolen pension contributions before any other debts are satisfied. This is insane. Silas was shaking now, his face purple. You're destroying me because your wife is a jealous bitter. Bailiff, Julian said quietly, remove Mr. Morrison for contempt of court. 2 federal marshals moved toward Silas. He backed away, still screaming. "This isn't over. I have friends. I have connections. You can't do this to me." "I just did," Julian said. "And Mr. Morrison, the contempt charge carries a fine of $10,000 and up to 6 months in jail. I'll be scheduling a hearing for next week to determine your sentence." The marshals took Silas by the arms. As they led him toward the door, he had to pass right by my seat in the gallery. I stood up and looked him directly in the eye. "Happy New Year, Silas," I said quietly. "I hope you find a nice, quiet place to think about your vision." The courtroom erupted as soon as Silas was removed. Journalists rushed for the exits to file their stories. The creditors' lawyers were shaking hands and congratulating each other. Silas's attorneys looked like they were considering a career change. I sat in my seat, stunned by what I just witnessed. My quiet, gentle husband had just destroyed a man's empire with nothing but facts, evidence, and the law. Julian finished signing some documents, spoke briefly with the court reporter, and then stood. "This court is in recess," he announced. "The receiver will file a preliminary report by January 10th. He left through the side door without looking at the gallery, professional to the end. I made my way out of the courthouse in a daze. The January air felt sharp and clean. On the steps outside, I saw a crowd gathering, employees from Morrison Elite Marketing, people I recognized from my 3 years there. When they saw me, several of them started clapping. "Brooke," Amanda called out, tears streaming down her face. Did you know your husband was going to save our pensions?" I shook my head, overwhelmed. I didn't know he was a judge until 3 days ago. "He's a hero," Marcus said. "Silas stole over $2 million from our retirement fund. We thought it was gone forever, but your husband just ordered it all returned with interest." Christina pushed through the crowd and hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for laughing at the party. You married the best man any of us has ever met, and we were too stupid to see it." By noon, the story was everywhere. Local librarian revealed as federal judge. Bankrupt CEO removed from courtroom after meltdown. Employees' pensions saved by surprise judicial appointment. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls and texts. Old colleagues apologizing. Reporters asking for interviews. Even my former boss from my first job telling me she had an opening if I was interested. But the call that mattered came at 2 p.m. It was from David Chen, Silas's attorney. "Mrs. Miller, I'm calling on behalf of the court-appointed receiver. Given your intimate knowledge of Morrison Elite Marketing's client accounts and your proven track record of excellent work, the receiver would like to offer you a position as temporary operations manager. You would oversee the orderly liquidation of the company's assets and help transition the viable client accounts to new management." I could barely process what he was saying. "You want me to manage the company?" "Temporarily, yes. The receiver believes you're the most qualified person to ensure the clients are properly served and the employees are treated fairly. The position would pay $150,000 annually for however long the receivership lasts, likely 6 to 12 months, plus performance bonuses." I looked around our small apartment, at the second-hand furniture and the thrift store Christmas tree, at Julian's books stacked neatly on shelves he'd built himself. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "Of course. Please call me back by end of day tomorrow." When Julian came home that evening, still in his suit, I told him about the offer. He smiled that gentle smile I loved. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to help the people Silas hurt," I said. "The employees who stayed loyal, who worked hard, who trusted him. They deserve better than to watch their livelihoods disappear." "Then you should do it." On January 5th, I walked into the offices of Morrison Elite Marketing for the first time since I'd been fired. Silas's name had already been scraped off the door. In its place was a temporary placard. Morrison Elite Marketing in receivership. The employees gathered in the conference room looked shell-shocked. Most of them had worked there for years. They'd believed in Silas, trusted him, built their careers around his vision. Now they knew he'd been stealing from them the whole time. I stood at the head of the table, the same table where I'd presented hundreds of client pitches, and looked at their faces. "I know you're scared," I said. "I know you feel betrayed. I know you're worried about your jobs and your futures. I'm here to tell you that while I can't save the company, I can save your dignity." I pulled out a stack of documents. The court has ordered the sale of Silas's personal luxury assets. His cars, his watch, his yacht deposit, everything. The proceeds will be used to pay back your stolen pension contributions first, before any creditors get a dime. You'll get every penny you're owed, plus interest. Amanda raised her hand. "What about our jobs?" "The receiver and I are working on that. Several of our clients have expressed interest in hearing our entire teams to work directly for them. Some of you will get better positions with better pay. Others might need to look for new opportunities, but I'll personally write recommendations for anyone who wants them." Marcus spoke up. "Why are you helping us, after everything we did to you at the Christmas party?" I met his eyes, because Silas taught me what kind of boss I never want to be. Over the next week, I worked 18-hour days dismantling Silas's empire. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way my old job had never been. I wasn't creating ad campaigns to sell luxury products to people who didn't need them. I was protecting real people from a con artist's greed. The receiver told me that Silas's personal assets had sold for $3.2 million. Every employee got their full pension back. Several of them cried when they saw the deposits hit their accounts. The Miami penthouse deal fell through, and Silas lost his deposit. The yacht company sued him for breach of contract. His Mercedes was auctioned off to pay creditors. His Rolex sold for $47,000, which went directly into the employee compensation fund. Meanwhile, Silas himself was fighting criminal charges. The IRS had filed a case for tax evasion. The Department of Labor was investigating the pension fund theft. His high-powered lawyers were very expensive, and he was running out of money to pay them. I didn't feel joy watching him fall. I just felt relieved that justice was actually happening. On January 15th, I received an email from Amanda. She'd been hired by one of our former clients as their director of marketing with a 40% pay raise. "Thank you for believing in us," she wrote. "Thank you for being the kind of leader we needed." That night, I showed Julian the email. We were sitting on our couch, eating takeout Chinese food and watching old movies. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud of you too," I replied. "You could have recused yourself from Silas's case. You could have let someone else handle it. But you didn't, because you knew the law would be served either way." "Justice isn't about revenge," Julian said. "It's about making things right." By February 1st, Morrison Elite Marketing had been completely liquidated. The viable client accounts had been transferred to reputable firms who'd agreed to hire most of our employees. The office space had been sold. The equipment had been auctioned. Everything of value had been distributed to creditors and employees according to the bankruptcy court's strict hierarchy. My job as temporary operations manager was complete. The receiver called to thank me and to tell me that several major firms had contacted him asking for my information. They'd heard about what I'd done, how I'd protected employees and maintained client relationships during a chaotic transition. They wanted to interview me for senior positions. "You could write your own ticket right now," he told me. "Executive Creative Director, Chief Marketing Officer, whatever you want. I've never seen someone handle a receivership this well." I thanked him and said I'd think about it. That evening, I sat with Julian on our porch. We'd just signed a lease on a small house with a porch, something we'd been saving for, and watched the sunset. "What do you want to do next?" Julian asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "For the first time in my career, I have options, real options. I could take one of these executive positions. I could start my own consulting firm. I could do anything." "What makes you happy?" I thought about the employees I'd helped, the pensions I'd saved, the satisfaction of dismantling a corrupt system and building something better in its place. "I want to help people," I said. "I want to use my skills for something that matters." Julian smiled. "Then that's what you should do." In March, I accepted a position as Director of Communications for a nonprofit that helped small businesses recover from fraud and bankruptcy. The pay was less than what the corporate firms had offered, but the work was meaningful in a way that selling luxury products had never been. Silas's criminal trial was scheduled for May. I'd been subpoenaed to testify about the financial documents I'd discovered. His lawyers tried to claim I'd stolen the files, but Julian, recused from the criminal case, had made sure everything was handled properly. The files had been legally acquired and legally provided to federal investigators. In April, I ran into Christina at a coffee shop. She was working for one of the firms that had hired our employees, and she looked good, less stressed than she'd been under Silas's management. "Can I buy you a coffee?" she asked. "I owe you an apology, a real one." We sat down, and she told me how guilty she'd felt since the Christmas party. "I laughed because I was scared," she admitted. "Silas created this culture where if you weren't cruel, you were weak. If you didn't mock people, you became the target. But that's no excuse. I should have been braver." "You're being brave now," I said. "I heard about your husband," she said. "About how he handled the case. Everyone's talking about Judge Miller, about how fair and thorough he is. You married an amazing man, Brooke. I'm sorry I couldn't see that." I thought about Julian, probably at the courthouse right now, carefully considering some complicated legal matter, making sure justice was served, making things right. "I am lucky," I agreed, "but not because of his job or his status, because he's kind and principled and sees the best in people." On a warm evening in May, Julian and I sat on our porch watching fireflies. He'd just come home from court, and I'd finished a successful campaign for one of my nonprofit clients. We'd ordered pizza and opened a bottle of cheap wine, and we were happy. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Staying quiet for so long, letting people underestimate you?" Julian thought about it, swirling his wine. "No," he said finally, "because the people who mattered knew the truth. You knew, the chief judge knew, my colleagues knew. Silas's opinion of me was irrelevant. He called you a nobody." And then he stood in my courtroom and learned what real power looks like. Not the kind that comes from money or status or Instagram followers. The kind that comes from truth and justice and the law. I leaned against his shoulder. "I love you." "I love you too." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Somewhere in the city, Silas was probably meeting with his lawyers, preparing for a trial he couldn't win. Somewhere, the employees we'd helped were going to bed without the fear of losing their pensions. Somewhere, justice was being served. And here on our porch, in our small house with our second-hand furniture and our old car parked in the driveway, we had everything that mattered. The quiet librarian and the designer who'd learned that success isn't measured in Rolex watches or penthouse apartments. It's measured in lives changed, in justice served, in the simple truth that kindness and integrity matter more than status ever could. We didn't need their approval. We never had. We just needed each other, and the quiet certainty that we'd done the right thing. The new year had finally begun, and for the first time in a long time, the world was exactly as it should be.